right, Jake, I'm pushing to YouTube. It'll be done in just a second. Okay, we're good to go.
Do you want to get started or do you want to wait a few minutes?
We can give it just a few minutes, but that way everybody knows we're actually gonna be doing this tonight. I'm on YouTube for now. We'll start the presentation shortly.
Okay, great. What do you think, Tanya? Should we go ahead and get going or should we wait a little bit longer?
We know Eric's a few minutes out, right? I think we should go ahead and get going. Yeah, he went this direction. Are we unmuted? Okay, Jake, we're good to go. We've got one more member coming, but he's gonna be a few minutes, so we'll catch him up when he gets here.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you all for coming in person or virtually to the Alamance County Snow Camp Zoning Ordinance meeting tonight. It's the steering committee meeting, the third that we've had with this project and process, and wanted to kind of just introduce myself first. My name is Jake Petrosky. I work with Stewart consulting firm out of Raleigh that's working with staff in the steering committee to draft a snow camp zoning ordinance. I don't know if we want to kind of go around the room and just introduce ourselves so everybody knows who's here. That would probably be good. But if Tanya, if you want to start with staff and those present there, and then we can go on to other folks on the phone.
All right, Jake. I'm Tanya Cattle, Planning and Inspections Director for Alamance County.
And I'm Taylor Pershaw, planner here at Alamance County, also in the room.
I'm Vaughn Willoughby, steering committee member.
Mhm.
I'm Ron Spinhoven, Snow Camp resident and steering community member.
And I think we have Marlena as well. Well,
Director for the county.
On the agenda tonight, we wanted to talk a little about the project schedule and some highlights from the ordinance, the draft ordinance, and then talk about steering committee comments and public comments that we've received and some changes that we've made, and then have a discussion and talk about next steps. So without further ado, we'll just jump in. So the project schedule, we started on this, man, it's hard to believe it was that long ago, but April, May timeframe, drafted the ordinance this summer, and we've been kind of going back and forth with modifying it and revising it since the summer. We did have a public workshop in September, and the steering committee #2 in September. So we've just been working on staff with revisions to the ordinance and the draft zoning map based on the feedback we've heard. And looking forward a little bit, we're going to have a joint meeting with the planning board and the board of commissioners sometime in December. We're going to try to sneak in a second public workshop in December. It might be the 1st of January, but we're going to see where we can fit that in. And then it would go to planning board and the board of commissioners before it was adopted. So that's kind of the general schedule there. And jumping into the ordinance itself, this ordinance draft that we're working from is the draft from November 4th. So that did update an earlier draft that was circulated to the steering committee. So keep that in mind. The purpose of the ordinance, looking at it overall, is to regulate the character of land use and development in the snow camp area, to mitigate conflicts between incompatible uses, minimize negative impacts to the natural environment, and also protect local character, aesthetics, and quality of life. So that's the goals as stated by the land development plan for this ordinance. The outline of the ordinance itself, it has some establishment administrative text, just establishing the ordinance, and talks about how it's going to be administered. Transitional provisions. This is going from right now where the county does have a number of ordinances and the Unified Development Ordinance, but this is the first zoning ordinance. So there's going to be a period of transition, and there's some flexible provisions in there that I'll talk about a little bit about during this presentation, just to deal with non-conforming uses and kind of protect them and investments and that sort of thing. There's a section on review procedures. So depending on what kinds of development is being proposed in the snow camp area, it could have 3 different review and approval procedures, and I'll go into more detail on that. It does outline zoning districts and a table of permitted uses, and those uses are also defined. Has some dimensional and design standards for different uses. And then it also has a section on nonconformities and definitions at the end of it. So I'm just going to hit some highlights here. With transitional provisions and non-conforming uses, this basically states that existing uses can continue within the existing footprint without any change and without any rezoning or anything like that. It also has build back provisions, for instance, if a structure that's not conforming was taken by fire or something, they can be built back. And it also has zoning ordinance compliance is only needed for changes of uses or expansions. So that's important as well. A lot of it, really all existing uses there are protected. There's not saying that anything has to stop or any homes are problematic or anything like that. So it does have a section on nonconformities. An example of a nonconformity is a house built on a lot that's smaller than the overall district it finds itself in, or non-residential uses that exist in a primarily residential district or that sort of thing. And as I stated, there's flexible provisions for allow uses to continue and structures to be rebuilt. And there's also some administrative flexibility on some things. like setbacks and that sort of thing to make sure it's in character is with the overall area. There's intensification or expansion, or any intensification and expansion requires an ordinance compliance. And there's some options on how you comply with the ordinance as well. Overall, we wanted to understand that there is going to be this period of transition, and we need to be flexible. And this is not a typical ordinance. This is not a suburban ordinance or ordinance that you would see in a town or city. This ordinance is really tailored to the rural area of Snow Camp, and it is focused really on reducing impacts to high impact uses and dense uses or those sort of things with existing residents and property owners. And it's not so much worried about nonconformities that aren't causing any issue. Another big thing that is important to talk about is agricultural uses. State law really exempts farms from zoning. So a lot of this ordinance really will not pertain to agricultural. The uses, the thing that this ordinance does do is try to protect agricultural uses from new development that could jeopardize those operations. An example of that would be, a high impact or heavy industrial use that comes next to a cattle farm, and there's a lot of noise or something that disturbs the agricultural operations or livestock. Another example of how this protects agricultural uses is it discourages really large scale or dense residential developments that could cause some conflicts potentially with existing agricultural operations. So that's important to note. The zoning districts that are defined, there's 4 of them. One is an agricultural district that supports agriculture and related uses, included residential and some non-residential uses. The rural residential use, which allows low density neighborhoods. It also has a rural cluster option that provides some flexibility on lot size, but caps an overall density and encourages development to be clustered away from natural resources and working farms and that sort of thing. There's a rural business district that allows and encourages small scale commercial uses, usually at crossroads, and will include most existing commercial businesses there. And then there's an industrial district that's appropriate for industrial uses, but performance standards also have to be met there. Some heavy industrial uses in this district will require a rezoning from whatever district it's in to the industrial district and a special use permit as the draft ordinance is currently written. And this is draft and dimensional and density requirements by district. You see the ag area has a pretty low maximum density and a pretty high minimum lot size. So that's really not an area that discourages kind of subdivisions, major subdivisions, dense subdivisions, and really tries to protect the agricultural uses in that area. There is an R1 district that has a maximum density of 1 unit per 2 acres and a minimum lot size of 1.25 acres. That was derived by looking at kind of existing residential uses in the area. That R1 district does have a rural cluster option that allows smaller lot sizes down to 20,000 square foot, depending on septic and what is needed to accommodate septic tanks and that sort of thing. But it caps the overall density at 1 unit per 2 acres to provide some flexibility there, but preserve some open space. Rural business district and then industrial district are also listed here. So when we get into decision types, there's 3 main decision types in the ordinance and allowed per state law. One is administrative, and that's a pretty objective decision that to really implement or administer development regulations. An example of that is I'll get into examples in a minute, and then there's a legislative decision, which is a policy decision to amend or adopt a law or ordinance. That's like a rezoning, would fall into that category. And then there's a quasi-judicial decision. It's a subjective discretionary decision based on evidence presented regarding a specific application or development regulation. Each one of these decision types is different in that the public participation allowance and the predictability for applicant and the kind of private sector expense or risk is different between each one of them. The administrative is largely a staff level decision, but it's very predictable. But it does have low participation in terms of the public input. But hopefully, the way we've written this ordinance, that it makes sense that if something's an administrative decision, it shouldn't really go through a big process. The legislative decision is really allows for high public participation and high local discretion, and the quasi-judicial is kind of a higher bar in terms of a process and also a higher risk. So that's why we've identified kind of higher impact or heavy industrial uses as requiring a rezoning, and then also a special use permit, which would be quasi-judicial. So that's a two-step process that really raises the bar on what would need to occur in order to approve those uses. Just walking through kind of the decision types. Administrative staff review happens, and then there's a decision from staff, and it can be appealed. Legislative decision, staff reviews it. Planning board makes a recommendation on it. Board of Commissioners has a legislative hearing to approve it. And then quasi-judicial staff review, evidentiary hearing, and then it can also be appealed. And to give you an example of how certain types of development would go through here, administrative. Example of administrative approval is a residential subdivision where a rezoning is not required. Like it's already in the R1 district and it meets overall density requirements and design requirements, and just needs to have an administrative approval. Another example is an ordinance compliant permit for a new home-based business in the area. We've tried to make it really easy to accommodate new home-based businesses, but also continue home-based businesses in this area, because we know that there's a lot of rural businesses, and we want to make sure that they remain part of the community and can prosper. The legislative rezoning decision process, an example of that would be if you were in the ag district, the agricultural district, and you own land or have purchased land and want to build a subdivision, you would rezone from agricultural to R1 to allow for a more dense subdivision, then allowed in the ag zoning district. And that would be a legislative process where there would be kind of a legislative decision at the Board of Commissioners level. Planning board would get to make a recommendation. There would be a public hearing and that sort of thing. Another example would be rezoning from R1, which is residential district, to residential or rural business, excuse me. And that rezoning process would be also a legislative process. We also have a conditional zoning district and process for certain uses that would allow commissioners to have a dialogue and attach conditions to certain approvals. The quasi-judicial process example is a special use permit for certain heavy industrial uses. So that situation will require a rezoning, but then it would also require a special use permit. I got a couple hypotheticals in here just to kind of walk through what some decisions and how those approval processes would go. One is the first one is a single family subdivision. And the first question is, where are we at? Well, let's say this is an R1. is the density of the subdivision permitted in R1? And does it meet design criteria? So that application would be submitted, staff would review it, and then there would be a staff level decision. That's how that would get approved. No rezoning would be needed if it meets the criteria in terms of design standards for conventional or the rural cluster subdivision. Single family subdivision rezoning. This is an example where maybe the existing zoning is ag, and if we wanted a subdivision that's more dense or has more lots in a per acre basis than is allowed in the agricultural district, then a rezoning would be needed. So the application would be submitted, staff would review it, there would be a recommendation by the planning board to approve or deny, and then there would be a legislative hearing by the Board of Commissioners to approve or deny it. So that is creating a decision process. Right now, there's not really a decision process for large subdivisions that requires input from the Board of Commissioners or Planning Board. So this is giving them some decision on certain kinds of uses like larger scale or more dense residential subdivisions. And the planning board would review and make a recommendation on this. They are required to review consistency statements for proposed rezoning, make recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, and then the Board of Commissioners looks at consistency with adopted plans, compatibility with adjacent properties, and then compliance with regulations. So that's how that works. Another example is a home-based business. So if it's an existing business and it's not expanding, then no permit is required to continue operating. That's part of the ordinance is something that's existing that can continue to exist. And there's also 3 different types of home-based businesses: exempt, and neighborhood and rural, and just based on how big of a operation can you have, and outdoor storage. Different levels of outdoor storage is allowed and that sort of thing. So just to walk through this, if it's a new home occupation, is a home occupation permitted in R1, then the application would, and if the answer is yes, and it is permitted with standards, then application will be submitted, staff would review it, and then an ordinance compliant permits would be issued. Another example of this, maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe this is like 3B. If it's an existing business, but it's expanding the storage area. So say I have a business and I have an existing kind of parking and storage area, and I need to expand it because I'm getting busier. As long as it meets criteria for neighborhood or rural home-based businesses, then that's fine. Not a big deal. If it's going to exceed the allowable outdoor storage area for that type of use, then rezoning to rural business would be needed. And just to give you an example of some rural home occupation standards that are in here, it's administrative approval standards are met, permitted on lots no smaller than 3 acres, a cap of employees, and some areas where you shouldn't display goods, some screening requirements, limits on hours, and some setback requirements, and dimensional requirements, and some signage. So those are the types of things that, as long as they meet that criteria, they're good to go. Hypothetical 4, rezoning for new retail. The question is retail permitted in R1? If this is in R1, then if the answer is no, then we must rezone to rural business. And an application is submitted, staff reviews it, planning board makes a recommendation, and then a legislative hearing by the Board of Commissioners. You'll note that in some cases, and this is a snapshot from the table of permitted uses, in some cases, businesses are permitted. P is permitted, and P with an asterisk is permitted with standards. And then there are some uses that are conditional. Zoning is required. So this is kind of to incentivize what we heard is smaller scale businesses are are fine, but if we get larger scale businesses, it could be problematic. Think about the difference between, a gas station or Dollar General versus like a Walmart or something like that. There's a bigger parking lot, there's a bigger use, a lot more trucks and parking and lighting and that sort of thing. So anything that is a retail building over 10,000 square feet would require a conditional zoning process. And the difference in that is during approval, the Board of Commissioners can include some conditions on approval. So in this hypothetical, the planning board, say like right across from Marathon Gas, right there, the crossroads, if somebody wants to put a new retail business across the street from the gas station, the planning board will review and make a recommendation. There would be a consistency statement drafted. The Board of Commissioners look at consistency with adopted plans, look at compatibility with adjacent properties, and either approve or deny it. If it's a conditional zoning, like a larger scale building, they can include conditions with that approval. And the conditions could be related to how to really reduce impacts on adjacent properties or mitigate potential traffic impacts, that sort of thing. Hypothetical number 5 is an industrial rezoning and special use permit. The current zoning designation in this case is agriculture, and the property owner wants to rezone to industrial. So we would go and we'd look at the table of permitted uses, and we'd see, okay, this is an agricultural use, so things like asphalt plants aren't allowed in the agricultural area. So rezoning would be required, and an application would be submitted, staff would review it, planning board would make a recommendation on it, and then there would be a legislative hearing by the Board of Commissioners on the rezoning only. And then there would need to be also a special use permit issued. So the rezoning process, let's stick with that first. Again, the planning board would review consistency statement drafted by staff for proposed rezoning. Is it consistent with the land development plan, which is the comprehensive plan for the county? Is it compatible with the character of surrounding areas? And then the planning board would make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners would then look at the consistency with adopted plans and compatibility, and then make a legislative decision on that rezoning only. And then, in this case, a special use permit would also be required. So there could be an application, staff review, and then there would be an evidentiary hearing by the Board of Commissioners or Board of Adjustment, and that would be either approved or denied. So it's a two-step process there. A lot of approval criteria for the special use permit. Is the proposal located, designed to be operated and to maintain and promote public health, safety, and welfare? Does it comply with all required regulations? Is it located and designed to be operated and enhance the value of contiguous property? Is the use on site screening, buffering, landscaping, vehicular ways harmonizing with adjoining properties? And if not, the conditions could be used and put on it to help the site fit in better. And we would also look at will it have significant adverse impacts on adjoining properties, and are necessary public and private facilities and services adequate to accommodate the proposed use? So that's the type of approval criteria that would go into a special use permit. So you can see that there's a lot of criteria that needs to meet. So those are the end of the hypotheticals. Just talking a little bit about some things we heard during the public meeting and at the last steering committee, and through public comments that have come in through the website and through steering committee members. What we heard was one thing was the idea of using conditional zoning process for some uses because it provides more opportunity for public input. There was some concern over oversight and notification in the rezoning process. what kinds of notifications would be needed. There was some confusion over who approves what. That's kind of why we took some time tonight to really go over those hypotheticals and to walk through kind of how different things would get approved. There was a stated desire or need to restrict all high intensity development from snow camp. And, right now we do have kind of the two-step process of rezoning would be required and a special use permit, which is a lot different than right now. According to the current Unified Development Ordinance, a high impact development part of that, if high impact uses or heavy industrial uses meet certain criteria, then it's basically a checklist, then they're allowed. Whereas this one, there's a legislative decision on the rezoning, and then there's a quasi judicial approval process for the special use permit. But that's it always could be more restrictive. We also heard that there need to be less restriction on manufactured homes and accessory dwellings or structures, and that the draft ordinance has too many restrictions on residential and commercial uses. And also, we heard that there needs to be more restriction on large commercial activities. So we did make some adjustments, and I've talked about some of them already, but we did add the conditional zoning process for certain non-residential uses in the rural business area. So including larger scale commercial. Since that was a concern, the larger scale commercial, we did add that, and that allows more of a dialogue between the Board of Commissioners and the applicant. In this case, could be a developer, and then also the public. So that conditional zoning process is an open process, and it's a legislative process where the board can attach conditions that make that development, conditions for approval that make that development fit in better and address some of the concerns that are raised through that process. We also added public notification procedures for legislative and quasi-judicial processes. These are required by state law, but we went ahead and added them to the ordinance to clarify that. And then we updated allowable uses in the table of permitted uses in the industrial category to really match the HIDO classes, the high heavy industrial development ordinance classes, to where there's more of a relationship between those. And we changed the approval process for mobile homes, parks and campgrounds to, I think it's now a conditional process. And then we relaxed a lot of regulations for residential and commercial uses, just because that's what we heard that comment a couple of times. Like, we need to really focus on tailoring this ordinance to the issues that are here, and heavy industrial uses are a concern, and dense residential uses, not so much just normal residential uses that fit, or smaller scale commercial uses. So we did a lot of things there. We relaxed accessory dwelling unit maximum square footage. We deleted location requirements for accessory dwelling units. I think it was in there requiring them to be behind the primary structure, to the side of a primary structure. But given that there's some larger lots in this area, and it could be that in front of the house is the best place for the accessory dwelling unit. So we relaxed that. We deleted a reference to the number of accessory structures permitted. I think that there was, a max number of accessory structures allowed in the original draft based on acreage. And what we heard was that that's not really a concern. And that's something that could be added to if it becomes a concern. If there's, all of a sudden a lot of landowners put some really visible accessory structures and that make a lot of neighbors mad or whatever, then that portion of the ordinance could be revised at some time in the future. Also relax accessory structure minimum in the ag district to be a lot larger. and reduced and simplified landscaping and road connection requirements, just to simplify things and make the ordinance more readable and understandable, that sort of thing. One of the things we did add was a public notification section that talks about, when a published notice, published in a newspaper, or a mailed notice mailed to adjacent property owners, or a posted notice is needed. And this is kind of a breakdown of that, based on whether the decision type is legislative or quasi-judicial. In certain cases, a public notice is required. In certain cases, mailed notice is required, or posted notice. According to state law, if an action or affects over 50 properties, then those mailed notices are not required, and half-page newspaper ads can be substituted for them. That's from state law. We don't have a whole lot of control over that, but we did kind of add this section to clarify what types of public notifications are required and when. The zoning map, if you look at this map, this is kind of the draft map that was the first draft. It's since been modified. You see the ag district and the R1 and rural business and then industrial district. We also had these candidates for split zoning. And those are areas where you have more than one distinct uses on a property. And we went ahead and got rid of those and kind of classified those according to the zoning district that they should be in. So now this is the draft 2 of the zoning map. You can see that there's no candidates for split zoning, just some areas are split zoned. And you can see that primarily most of the snow camp area is in that agricultural district. And there are some areas in the rural residential and existing some major businesses or the rural business district. But you can see that's kind of how it shakes out. There's a few industrial properties, but not many. And we did get one comment from a steering committee member that suggests a change to R1. There's some kind of residential properties just on the west side of a grouping of R1 properties, kind of just east of Holman Road on Quackenbush. And I think that makes sense. So we're probably going to make that change as long as the steering committee doesn't have any issue with that. And at this point, we can kind of open it up for discussion. But the next steps really, I think tonight is the steering committee number 3. I think we were going to do the joint planning board and board commissioners meeting in December. We're kind of deciding on a date. Tanya's trying to coordinate that. We're going to try to sneak in a public workshop before Christmas or right after the new year. And then this ordinance would move forward and go to the planning board and board of commissioners for approval. So I know that was a lot. I apologize, but I'll kind of break and see if the steering committee members have any thing they want to talk about.
How are you, sir?
Ron, you've heard quite a bit. Ron, you've heard quite a bit, sir. Is there something that jumps out at you as good, bad, or are we indifferent?
Well, I think I had a lot of notes, and I think most of the things he's talked about pretty much addressed the things that I had sort of been thinking about. How to allow small commercial in there, but that's pretty much done. Home-based businesses, agribusiness and agriculture is pretty well protected.
Mm-hmm.
The residential development part, really, it's going to have to go through a process to get rezoned, to get subdivisions built. They're not just going to be a rubber stamp. Somebody comes in with a subdivision plat and it's okay, let's go. There's going to be a bigger process now, which I like. I like that idea. One of the things that was said was one of the hypotheticals was about agricultural lands and industrial button up to it. My bigger concern is not industrial land, or industrial use button up to a farm, but residential use button up to a farm. There's been more problems with agriculture and
Yeah.
residential button heads together than it ever has been with industrial. Because, you know, those people go home at night, the industrial people. You know, but the farm goes on 24 hours a day. And when they're out there cooking out and we're out there trying to, you know, plant corn or feed cows or whatever else has to be done, you know, there's that. So that's a bigger deal. I mean, one of the questions I had is, does this zoning ordinance take the place of the HIDO
No,
in the
it
snow
there
camp
is-
plan?
the high, or the UDO that we approved,
Right,
has a chapter saved for the snow camp zoning. So if there's something that isn't spoken to in this document, UDO is gonna pick that up.
okay,
So-
because I was, you know, the UDO now, or the way the HIDO was, which is now the other, I guess it's all the UDO now.
Yes,
Right. I mean, there's a lot of process for a heavy industrial application.
well, so a
Right.
heavy industrial, right now, they bring it to us, we say it meets all the technical stuff. We bring it to planning board, and then we bring it to commissioners, and that goes for public hearing, we advertise that in the paper, or we post, do the
Right.
property or whatever. And then commissioners don't have a way of saying no if they if they agree all the technical pieces are met, they can't say no.
Right, but there's at least, there's several sets of eyes that are gonna
But this
see it.
new piece, they'll have the ability, even if they can meet all the technical pieces, they'll have the ability to come back and say, this doesn't fit.
Doesn't fit the
We
plan.
don't think this is a good idea here. Our answer is no.
Okay, well, that's what, I thought that's what I was
Yes, sir.
thinking, and I think that's good. Those are my, that's all really I've got much to say about it. It seems they've relaxed the things about, you know, the outbuildings or the structures. I thought that was kind of, I think in general, it seems to be a little more, a little simplified, a little simpler plan. It seemed a little bit like we were developing Apex and Cary all of a sudden, you know, the first. No,
So
don't take that the wrong way, Jake. I didn't mean to.
No, but our,
sound-
Jake and I coordinate on that. Our intent was to throw everything at you on the first draw
Right.
and see what drew your attention, what you liked, what you didn't like, take out stuff you didn't. So that was intentional.
Well, and so it looks a little more like Alamance County now to me than it did before. I'll stop, let somebody else talk.
And one of the things, Vaughn, that we did keep in there and clarify a little bit, with the residential standards, there is an agricultural buffer required now. That for residential subdivisions greater than 3 lots that abut agriculturally zoned land or working farms, they're required a minimum 30-foot vegetated buffer. And, you know, the planning director, if it's preservation of existing vegetation, the planning director can grant that. They don't need to plant anything, but if not, then something needs to be done. So that's putting the onus really on the new residential subdivision to be a better neighbor to agricultural. So I did want to point that out.
That's good. That's very good.
Are you done, Vaughn?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
No, okay, I just wanted to make sure. I have a few comments. When we were looking at the administrative, or, you know, I was looking at administrative, and I think it's still in there that way, that there was one thing that I didn't like about it, was that it did not force the Board of Commissions to contact the planning board, but leaves it to the planning board to contact the Board of Commissioners if there's going to be a zoning change or a request for a zoning change. I think the Board of Commissioners needs to reach out to the Planning Commission, Board of Planners. Without them having to reach out in other words, they have to be notified. If they decide not to do anything about it, that's a whole different story. But I think they need to be notified.
Well, I'm not following. Is that for a text change or something?
That's for a zoning change.
And which board are you thinking needs to be notified by the other?
For the legislative part of it, for a zoning change, if I recall, the Board of Commissioners are not required to reach out to the planning board. And I'd like to see them required to at least notify the planning board that they're looking at a zoning change. And if the plan.
First.
Jake, do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
Are you talking about a rezoning or a text change to the actual ordinance?
I believe it's the rezoning.
So rezoning is actually, the applicant applies with staff reviews, gives a recommendation, but it has to go to planning board for recommendation before it can go to commissioners. It can't skip that process. Now, planning board can table it, and after so long, it has to push anyway to the commissioners, but by state law, you have to hit that planning board before you go to commissioners.
But Ron, I think if it's an amendment to the zoning ordinance, the Board of Commissioners doesn't necessarily have to get input from planning board. Is that what you're talking about?
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think. Chad, are you there? You speak to that? I thought that there was some state law that talks about that, but
It was in the early part. It was in the early part of the text. Then
let me see if I can find it.
It was in the definition of the role of the.
Yeah. I think it's just I think that's related to amendments. It says that the Board of Commissioners may at any time amend, supplement, change, or modify the Code of Ordinances and any boundaries of the maintained map. But it says in advance of a decision by the Board of Commissioners, the planning board shall be given an opportunity to review and make comment or make recommendation on the proposal. And I think that is from state law. So that's in there.
Okay. I guess the wording is a little vague, shall be given, but.
That totally reads just like the law does. We pulled that straight out of there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Jake. I was here, but I was speaking and no one could hear me. So, yeah, you're correct on that. That is something that's straight from the general statutes.
And
Okay.
Ron, just one note, Ron and committee, our legal team has reviewed this before we brought it to you all. They didn't see any legal changes that needed to happen, and we're completely in following state law and everything.
All right. There was one minor thing I recall from the last time I read it was the in terms of bed and breakfasts, having to that a manager or owner must be living on premise, which I don't think makes a lot of sense for a small Airbnb kind of thing. It might not be room for somebody to live on the premise, or they could be living in another state, and it's not practical to have a manager live on premise if it's a small, several rooms, or even more than several rooms. But something I remember, because we actually had a bed and breakfast in another country, and we could never be there, and there was only a one one family house, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that as something I think could be changed. And then in I think this might come under the residential use group in 5.5.4 to add cooperatives, as in like a senior cooperative where
Like co-housing, is that what you mean?
co-housing is another way of putting it. And I think it might go in there, or it might go in another place, but it's not a subdivision, but it's a multiple dwelling housing. Usually it's going to be on one ownership or one title on the property, but the ownership of the individual houses might be might go to the resident. There's some examples of that I could provide, but the actual land does not belong to the house.
Is there a local example, Ron, that you can point to?
There's one in Durham that I believe it's called Eldersley or something, but I'm not. I could bring it up, and I'd have to try to figure out how to get off of my screen here to do that.
The elderberry,
Elderberry, that's the one. Thank you. And they're in Durham. They're very small. I think they're only a 10-acre, and they have another farm right next to it. But that would be one. And I think there was another one towards Raleigh, but Solera. I could do a screen share if you want.
No, I mean, I think we can work with staff on kind of what to do about that. It is kind of like I guess a relatively new type of thing in the area. You know what I mean?
Right. But it is something that's trending at this point, you know, and will probably continue to grow in the future.
And I think that my immediate reaction to that is, well, as long as like the dwelling units, like the number of dwelling units doesn't exceed, that what's allowed in like R1, let's say, I mean, it's a similar footprint to a low density subdivision, really, so we just got to figure out how that fits into the ordinance, whether it's a separate use or whether it's defined in the residential use group, and kind of what that process is. It might have a few, if you look in there, I mean, we've tried to look for some of the new uses that we're seeing, and there's that P asterisk, the P star in the table of permitted uses, and there's just some special kind of design requirements for those kinds of uses. So, I mean, it could be that we add co-housing as a use and just say it needs to meet, this criteria. It can't be over the density of the R1 district, and, you can't put, parking and trash cans near your neighbor or something like that, like that kind of stuff.
Okay. And then probably finally for me is that this whole idea of zoning for snow camp came out because we had the quarry, to be honest. And what the residents here really were hoping for, at least most of them, and I don't think this really addresses it, is that it still allows for that to happen again. And I think if we were to eliminate pretty much, all of the class 3, pretty much all of the class 3 heavy industrial uses and make them non-permitted, that would make people rest a lot easier here. And I propose that we do that. So we don't even have to worry about the high industrial uses, the development uses, if they're not permitted at all. And that's really where I think most of us here are at as residents. So that's my proposal. You could have the class 1 and class 2s in there too, but if we at least got the class 3s, that would be a real win.
So Jake,
Whereas
do you want
this
to take that?
this doesn't really do anything to prevent that from happening.
Well, I mean, it makes it harder. There's an actual decision process, two bars of decision processes where right now there's none. So, I mean, I think it makes it more difficult, but you're right. It doesn't necessarily prohibit them. Tanya, you want to say something?
Yeah, Ron, so I'm hearing what you're saying. I understand where we started and where we're trying to get to. I would say, I think our legal team would have a little concern about that because by state law, you cannot zone things out. And that if we're taking things completely out of any possibilities, I'm not sure that they can legally keep that way. Putting all these restrictions on means they have to jump through a lot of hoops. There's public involvement. Ultimately, there's a decision that's well beyond staff that will make that decision to see if it is or is not a fit. But actually taking it out, I think we're borderline illegal on saying you just can't do anything, period, with no restriction.
Well, and it's tricky because we're only zoning part of the county.
Right.
So I mean, I think that technically you would not be like prohibiting that use somewhere else in the county.
Right. Now, the rest of the two of the steering committee members are here. I don't think they see it as strongly as Ron does. I think Vaughn or Eric, y'all can speak up, but it sounds like maybe different members are seeing things a little bit different from the committee's perspective.
Well,
I understand where he's coming from, but I mean, I see, like I said, that they were against the rock quarry. But I mean, there's a lot of people in our area that are not necessarily against the rock quarry. So I mean, you're going to have people that are not going to agree with that from that side too. But I mean, and he's going to have people that will agree with it. But I mean, there's going to be some people that are definitely not going to agree with that.
I understand what you're saying. Under state law, you can't just throw a blanket over one specific set of type of businesses or entities and say, we're just not going to let those people in. That's not legal by state law. But because of the process that you're going to have in place here, if it's a bad fit, or if it's a bad actor, if it's a kind of thing that really just doesn't quite fit in, there will be enough public hearing, public input, and outcry against it that more than likely it won't pass through the process. That's kind of where I see it. I think what Jake says is there's just a lot more involved now with this kind of ordinance that makes it more difficult for those people to get in.
It's a whole lot more difficult.
The process that happened, with the rock quarry was extremely an elementary, extremely simple process to get that permit in the old way, the old law. There was hardly no one saw it really other than, one or two people.
Right.
And that's shame on us as a county to not have a better process
It's
at
hard to
the
predict,
time, you know. But I think this is a long and large step in the right direction toward stopping those kinds of things from happening in the future.
So Ron, to give you a little perspective, when we're writing this ordinance, Jake and I and Taylor, legal departments, teams are looking at a straight zoning is something that's relatively simple. It goes to planning board, it goes to commissioners. If it fits the area and the land development plan, it usually gets a nod. We didn't want to make it that easy. So we're going in and doing the rezoning process, and on top of that, the special use permit process, which is what we're calling the quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. So that becomes a much bigger task that you have to prove, the applicant has to prove that they deserve to be able to do these types of things, more so than just a nod and it sounds good kind of thing. So we wanted to make it, those are the two strongest ways by state law that we can even question somebody or ask somebody to go through those hoops to get anything accomplished through land development. Those are not options we've ever had on the table because we haven't been able to get to the step of zoning. So we hear y'all, we intentionally put the hardest steps through state law to get these types of uses done in Alamance County because we don't want it easy. We want to make sure that everybody's confident this is the right decision when the decision is made. Can you hear us, Ron?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I guess I said my piece on that. I still don't know if this goes far enough to stop those things from happening. But
I'll get legal to address that for me, and then we'll send something out with whatever I hear back from them. Does that help?
sure, thank you.
Okay. Is that all for you, Ron? You didn't have any other comments?
I think that's all. The only thing I may mention is I'm not sure that the solar farm and the quarry map are actually accurate on the last map, this current map.
Okay.
There's a section on the if we bring it up, the kind of small, but the solar farm, there's a large section next to it, and I forget, I think it's, can't see it very well on.
Hold on, I can let me share a different map here. Hold on. I got a better map. Is that better?
Yeah. So there's this there to the from my screen to the right of the solar farm is also part of the solar farm, but it's, and I believe it's all one parcel with the solar farm, but it's actually looks like it's got an agricultural zone there. And then I believe that the quarry is inaccurate in terms of
The quarry is just the area of operations defined. That is one thing. We just put the area of operations as the I district, so it's not going to include all of it. Yeah.
That's intentional, so they can't do anything more than they've already been approved for. We don't want all the land they own zoned industrial, just what we've approved as industrial. That's why we did that.
Okay. I was looking at it with Bill Poe, and he thinks that their office building is their mobile home there is actually outside of that.
Yeah. The office building is right here. Yeah, but it won't be like, it's not going to have any mining or anything like that in that area. I mean, that's kind of a judgment call on whether we include the office or not in it. Right now, as it shows, it's just a non-conforming use in the ag district.
Ron, that actually helps protect the neighbors from us being able to stretch that industrial zoning any further. It really restricts the quarry from being able to do much of anything. That's why we did that. Allowing that office building, as we said, non-conforming use, it can stay as is until, but if they decide to make any changes, they have to come back to us and ask those permissions. So we did that intentionally as well. Now it's up to the committee. If y'all want us to stretch it and cover the actual office, that's kind of what we're here for tonight.
Okay. It was hard to hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, there was two talking, so it was hard to hear. But all right, I'm not sure how that affects it in the future. Does it make it easier in the future if they change the zoning, if they can get more land somewhere else, but maybe the setbacks would stop it? I don't know. Because they have this, the stream borders on the other sides.
That's true. Yeah, you've got environmental constraints on top of just really funky lay on the land too.
We worry about being, a cement plant being stuck or an asphalt plant being stuck in there.
I understand. Jake, do you want me to check with legal to see how they would prefer it?
Yeah, we don't really feel strongly either way. I think we heard, both as being suggested. So, I mean, I think we can do whatever is kind of, everybody thinks this is best. And then we'll look at that solar farm extent, Ron, on the other side of it. We'll just look at that and make sure that we got it correctly.
Yeah, I think when we looked at it, it had that those two parcels were actually one parcel.
Gotcha. We'll take a look.
But I guess that's it for me.
Okay. Did y'all, Eric or Ron, after Ron speaking, anything else coming on?
No, I think those are good points. I like the idea of what he said about the bed and breakfast. I think that it seems sort of having to have somebody live there.
Well, the bed and breakfast, so let's go back there. So we're not really regulating like short-term rentals, like a house that would be rented. Like we're not really doing any of that. I think bed and breakfasts are defined by state law as when somebody is living there.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. I was going to chime in. You're exactly right. So there's a general statute that defines what a bed and breakfast facility is, and it also even goes a little further into break it down versus a home versus an inn. And it's based on a statute dealing with the regulation of food and lodging. And so because of that statute, because someone's living there and because they're being served as food, they have some exemptions where they may not have to, deal with some other sanitation things like a restaurant might have to do or something like that. So that's where it's defined. And that's why that has that information in there about living in the house that it is, because it has to do that to be classified as a bed and breakfast. Now, I think what you're talking about, Jake, is and what y'all are talking about was like a short-term rental type deal, like an Airbnb or something like that, which I think would be different from this, at least from a statutory standpoint.
Or it would be a hotel or an inn or
Correct.
something, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we had no intention of regulating somebody renting their house or Airbnb.
Okay,
State law's not really clear on that right now,
that's
so
fine.
that's a bit further step. The bed breakfast, as he said, environmental health gets involved in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And somebody being there is part of that definition.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't know.
Yeah, and I think what would happen is so bed and breakfasts right now, they're permitted everywhere with some basic standards. I think what you're talking about in the inn or, something like that would go under a hotel motel. And, that would not require somebody to live on premise, but we're not allowing that in ag or in the R1 district. Right now, we have it as a conditional zoning in the rural business. So that's kind of how we're treating those two things differently. Short-term rentals, we're not really regulating. Bed and breakfast is flexible, but it has to meet that state-defined criteria. And then a hotel motel, yeah, it could be a couple rooms, but it could be a bigger thing. That would be a conditional rezoning.
Can I ask a hypothetical?
Yeah.
All right, so I have seen this in other counties on other people's farms, and I think there are some wineries that have this too. They have built small cabins on their farms, and they rent those out like for overnight stays for guests to come and have that agro-tourism, whatever experience. They spend the night on the farm on a cabin out next to the cornfield or whatever. I mean, believe it or not, there are people that don't know what a cornfield looks like or a green bean or anything else. And there's a great experience for them to take their children and see a cow and a tractor and a garden. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous. It does to me, but in that sort of thing, are we at a place in this where we would allow something like that? Because obviously this is a large agricultural district. This whole area is a lot of ag, and agritourism is a thing, and it's becoming more of a thing. And I could see that maybe being something someone may say, I'd like to do that because my buddy over in Lincoln County is making big dollars renting out cabins on the weekends at his, farm. So what would be required in this type of thing? Will we have to get them rezoned, or is it because it's agritourism, is it exempt? Or is this a gray area?
It's a little bit of it's a little bit of a gray area, I think. If it's an existing home, then it wouldn't be regulated really. If they want to build a new home, if the home fits criteria for an accessory dwelling unit, then they could do that and do whatever they wanted with it. If it's the type of thing where I want 4 cabins, then right now I think it would require subdivision unless we write something in here that allows for co-housing. That there could be a senior co-housing, like one property and 4 homes and some jointly shared property or a structure or something like that. I mean, maybe there's a co-housing agricultural tourism thing that we can write, or tourism related thing. I don't know. But those are some thoughts on kind of different ways that it would be or could be treated.
Well, I know that it could possibly happen. I mean, and I'm just asking, is there a way to figure it out?
Is it the committee's wish to say that's okay, or do y'all say, it's not a good idea, we'd like to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, again, this is hypothetical. If you've got 200 acres or whatever on your farm, and I'll say this about our farm, there is a parcel that we have that's probably 35 or 40 acres. It's separate from the main body of the farm, but it borders the Hall River, the river itself. And there's on the top edge of that field, it's a wooded area that would really be, you could go in there and put 3 or 4 little cabins down in those woods, and they're looking down across that big meadow, across that big hayfield down toward the river. It's a beautiful place to see the sun come up. I could see where that would be. Not that we're necessarily going to do that, but it's set up perfectly. The road's already there with not a lot of work. You can get the road in there to it. And just, at a big farm or even a smaller, 100-acre farm, you would not lose a lot of land having something like that. It wouldn't interfere with the farming operation. And it would be a way to
Supplement income.
make some more money, you know,
Mhm.
so I would be in favor of something like that. I don't mean that we're gonna build a mobile home park and put 200 units back there. That's different. We've already got a regulation for that. But I'm talking about some sort of an agritourism. I don't know if that's even what it is. It's like, it's really sort of a muddy water. It's on the farm and it's sort of that thing, but it's not, it's sort of like an Airbnb or a cabin rental.
Well, I think, I mean, I think if y'all want to kind of get us to look into that, I mean, I think we can look into the co-housing piece of this and what we're calling agri-tourist homes or something like that. And,
I'd like to see if there's a way it can be put in there and that it makes sense. You know, and I'm not in favor, it could be limited to a certain number. I mean, I don't want it to become, we're gonna build a village of cabins and there's 100 of them, you know, that's ridiculous. Because then you're losing the whole thing. But,
well, there's, you know, there's right now, it would just have to be subdivided. But I can see how that's not really ideal. If you got 100 acres and you just want to put two, tourist homes on it, right?
yeah, something like that, you know, it could be 3 or 4 or 5, but
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah, but just kind of playing out this hypothetical, you wouldn't want to build like a big paved road back there, right? Like, like that
No, I'm not looking for a village and a store and a bar and I'm not, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But,
I have a suggestion. So I think with this, two things, right? I think first of all, you need to define, what it is we're talking about, right? I mean, I don't know that there's a true definition or a true land use for that type of thing. And so maybe it's agritourism and, this applies to, 50 acres or 100 acres, and they can have up to 2 accessory dwelling type unit type things. So I think you define it and then you put some parameters on it, because I think the danger of it is you don't want to get too much, right? Like you said, you don't want to have this village and you don't want to have like a, little community pop up. But at the same time, I think you also need to really define and exactly adjust what that level is. The good thing about having this ordinance and really, particularly a zoning ordinance is it's the most living sort of document that you can ever have. And so, after 6 months or a year, when y'all are into this and, let's say this becomes a reality and you start seeing more things of it. And, maybe the parameters are too tough right now and you want to loosen them up. You always have that ability to kind of go in and make some amendments, over time. So I guess the thing that I'm telling you is that don't feel like, it has to be perfect and every scenario has to be addressed. I think we've done, y'all have done a good job of that and your staff and trying to analyze things, but just keep in mind that, later on down the road and, you're going to see things, and as they occur and adapt, you're just going to have to make amendments to the code. So, whatever decisions are made it's final for that night, it gets adopted, but there is opportunities to adjust it and make amendments over time.
well, that just popped into my brain.
Yeah.
And it was just a thing that I thought about. And I thought, well, we're all here right now. Let's
That's fine.
throw it out there and see if it sinks or swims.
There are several that already exist here.
Right, so once we write the new ordinance, what is there is fine, but somebody new coming in would have to come under new regulation. And so what you're asking for, as Jake said, we'd have to cut them off into different pieces at this point.
Right, I just wondered how it would look, how it would work. There's got to be a way we could look into what's happened and I might try to find some examples of
You're
it.
talking about Lincoln County?
Well, I'm just using Lincoln as an example, but I know that in the Yadkin Valley, like in Surrey County or
Some of
state,
the wineries I've
the
heard.
wineries have those kinds of things on their farm. You know, they have these little cabins out there that people rent and spend the night in the vineyard. And so it's being done there, and I don't know how they have permitted it or how they allow it or what their defined use is, but I would love to know, and if we can apply it to this, maybe we should.
Well, that's good. That gives us some idea of where to look, at least where you know there are some.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
think it's worth looking at and maybe even putting it into this. If I think it's, if somebody that puts in 3, 4, 5 units, that they don't have to get some kind of special use for it.
Yeah, we can come up with some stuff. I think we can look at some areas over in the Yadkin Valley and put some parameters on it, and we can make it permitted with standards. And then they have those standards. The same thing with co-housing. I think we can make it permitted in the R1 district, like with standards. Like these agritourism homes or whatever, these tourist homes, they could be permitted with standards in the R1 and ag, and just have a certain property size minimum and a maximum number of units on there as accessory units. So I think that's fine.
Well, I'd love to see what it looks like. I mean, I can see where I can just think about our farm, and not necessarily that I would want all of them in one place. There's a spot out on the north side that would be pretty out there near one of our ponds. Over on the other side, there's 4 or 5 spots on that farm that you put one there, one out there, another one, down there by the river. They could be scattered around. Because I'm thinking if you did it, if you were a family or you're a group of people who want to go there and stay, you don't want somebody else right up next to you. I'm not talking about, like a campground situation. You'd rather it be where it's private, where you got it to yourself.
Like when you go to the mountain stone cabin, you don't want to see it.
Right. So that's, anyway, just
We'll ponder that.
figure that out. And have a report on my desk by 8 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely. Well,
I think I'm done.
Eric, did that spawn anything for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's, like Vaughn said, you got a lot of acres, and I mean, in order to survive in the years coming, the farmer's gonna have to diversify some income,
Okay.
and that would definitely be a way of doing that.
Well, I mean, you remember the original goal in this was to help preserve agriculture too,
Yeah.
and that may look different than it ever has before. We wouldn't want to hold people back from being able to do. We don't want these maybe not so farm people buying farms
That's right.
and then turn them into these great escapes with very little control.
Right.
That's where this language comes in, where we can get to control a little bit of that.
Okay.
Well, Jake, did you hear anything tonight that kind of really changed anything for us? We've got some things to add, but.
No, I mean, nothing too crazy. I mean, I think that a few of these edits, I think will help it make it better.
So as y'all heard Jake say from the beginning, he kind of gave y'all the project plan. From here, we're hoping to get to that meeting with planning board and commissioners in the same room with the draft based on what y'all said tonight. We'll shoot y'all that draft, of course, before we get to them and wait for any comment that y'all might have on that. But bring them in the same room, let everybody have a discussion. All of us will be there, kind of walk through this beginning to end idea. And 2 of y'all being on planning board can kind of help explain how the subcommittee has worked together and what we've done, and see what kind of feedback we get from that. And then we're going back out to the public. We're going to put that map out. We'll make some adjustments to that and put the draft out, hopefully by the end of the year, and see what we get. If we get some pretty decent feedback or not too much challenge of what additional language we need, we look to kind of move forward with this, maybe not exactly in January, but in the new year, as he was saying. Remember, your moratorium for heavy industrial down there ends March 1st. We want to be way ahead of that if we can be, so that we get some language and get something on the books well before that expires. And that hopefully will be maybe 45, 60 days ahead of time. Jake, are we good with all that? Yeah, there's your schedule he's put together for us. We're aiming for a beginning of December joint planning board commissioner meeting and wait to hear back to make sure board commissioners can make that commitment to us. And then we'll go ahead and roll with the date and get that set pretty quick, hopefully this week.
Good.
Yeah. All right, Ron, anything else for us?
No, that's all for me.
We'll get y'all a draft. Like I said, there weren't that many changes tonight, so getting a draft out won't be too hard, won't be too long for us to get that to y'all. And hopefully y'all like what you see. It sounds like as we've moved through the process, y'all have seen us clean up in response to y'all's comments and public comments. And that's what we're here for. We're kind of here to do the written work of what y'all tell us and give us guidance on.
And I would add that I would like to see the comments from legal on the class 3 not permitted idea.
Okay, I'll get with them. They don't usually take too long to get back with me. He'll do a little research and then get back with us.
Okay.
Great. Jake, anything for closing?
No, I appreciate the time, guys.
Well, thank you.
Thank you as
All right,
well.
y'all. Thank you. We'll see y'all soon.